Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today we are going to discuss few important concepts before proceeding further, right? So we need to understand a few important, right? Let me open the EDMX file, right? So once I open the EDMX file, right? So you can see, okay, let me put all these things together. Right? So guys, you can see my screen is visible to all of you, right?
Yes, visible.
Right. So do you know, guys, what is the relationship between the star and 0 and 1? 0 dot dot 1 star, 0 dot dot 1 star. There is something star 0 1 0 dot dot 1 1, right? So there is star and star. Anybody having any idea what do we mean by these things?
The kind of relations between
Exactly.
both entities.
Exactly. So this is nothing but the relationship between the entities, right? What relationship? Uh, so that you have in the database, the same relationship is represented here, right? So in the database you have primary key and foreign key to represent the relationships, but in our entity it is the navigation property which defines the relationships, right? So you can see core standard, these are navigation property, right? These are the properties, right? 1 2 3 4 5. These properties you can find in the database also, but this navigation property, what you can see in the entity, in our entity data model, right? These properties you cannot find in the database, but what you can find in the database, you can find the foreign key relationships in the database, right? The foreign key relationship, what is we used in our database, that is going to be represented as navigation properties in our entity data model, right? So as we have discussed, right, as we already have discussed, there are two types of navigation properties. What are these? Can anybody tell me?
Reference navigation property and collection navigation property.
Exactly. So a reference navigation property and collection navigation property. So by looking at this, by looking at these entities, can anybody tell me, right, between this teacher and its students, which one is a reference navigation property and which one is collection navigation property?
So like teacher is like a reference and the student is a collection navigation property.
Right. So basically, whenever see one property is in plural form, right, that is going to be your collection navigation property. Here you can say teacher, not the teachers, right? So here you can say teachers. In the standard table, you can see teachers. In the course table, you can see it is a teacher, right? That means both are pointing to the same teacher, right? So this course having relationship with the teacher, the standard is also having relationship with the teacher. But here it is teacher, here it is teachers, right? That means this is nothing but your reference navigation property, and this is nothing but your collection navigation property, right? So before explaining what do you mean by the star 1 0 dot dot 1, let us first understand few important concepts, right? So it is a common requirement in relational database to establish relationship between the database table or entities, right? So if you are developing one relational database, right? So it's a common requirement, right? We are having multiple tables, right? And we are going to store the data in different tables, right? And there should be some relationship. For example, if I'm having a employee table and if there is a department table, right? And if I'm going to store the department ID in my employee table, then first of all, I need to make a relationship between my employee and the department table, right? For example, there is a student address table and student table, right? So what is my requirement? Whenever I'm entering the student data, I also need to enter the corresponding student address data in the student address table, right? That means first of all, I need to establish some kind of a relationship between the student and student address table, right? So that means what? It's a common requirement, right, in our relational databases to implement or to establish some kind of relationships, right? And whenever we try to establish the relationship between two entities, right, then one of the entity will act as a principal entity and another entity will be act as a dependent entity. So, right. So if I am going to implement some kind of a relationship, first of all, there should be at least two entities, right? Relationship means I need to establish the relationship between two database tables. And among the two database table, one of the database table or entity, you can consider it as the principal entity, and the other entity, right, you will be considered as the dependent entity. So let us first identify, or let us first try to understand what do we mean by dependent entity and what do we mean by principal entity. So what is a principal entity? The entity which contains the primary key or unique key properties is called principal entity. And what is dependent entity? The entity which contains the foreign key properties is called dependent entity, right? And if you go to the database, right? If you go to the database, right? So here you can see, this is my student table. The student table contains the primary key, right? This is my teacher table. The teacher table also contains the standard ID column, right? A standard table contains the standard ID column. Teacher table contains the standard ID column, right? So whenever you are establishing the relationship, that means the same column should be available in both the table, right? So in this case, the same standard ID column is available here also. The same standard ID column is available, right? And here I mark this column as primary key, and here I mark this column as my reference key, or you can say foreign key. So as this table contains the primary key, so this table or this entity will be considered as your principal entity. The entity or table, right, which contains the primary key or unique key properties or columns, properties, or you can say columns, is called your principal entity, right? And similarly, the table or the entity which contains the foreign key column is called as the dependent entity. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right? From the relational database point of view, you already know that the relationship between the entities and the tables are established using the foreign key, right? So you see, in this case, it contains the primary key. It is also containing the primary key. If this foreign key is not there, right? If I'm not creating this as a foreign key, rather than I just create this column like this, right? If I created the column like this, is there any relationship between standard and teacher table? Even though it is having student ID, then how you can make sure that the student ID is related with the standard table, right? You cannot relate this, right? The column name is going to be same, right? If you check, if you are working with real-time application, the ID column is there in each and every column. Each active column is there in each and every column. Created date, right? Modified date. Some of the columns you can find in each and every database table. That doesn't mean they are related to each other, right? So when you can say that there is a relationship, now whenever you see the foreign key, right? So in this case, you can see this is the foreign key, and the foreign key means it is referring to some other table. It is establishing a relationship with some other table. In this case, it is establishing a relationship with which table? Standard table, and based on which column? The standard ID column, right? It might be possible that in this case, it might be ID, right? And in this case, it might be ID like this. Even though the column names are different, here ID and here standard ID, still they are having the relationship. How you can say that this standard ID column, right, having a relationship, establishing a relationship with the standard column, standard table ID column. So in this case, what is the data type of this column, right? And the data type of this column should be matched. It should not be like that. I can make the relationship like this. This is not possible. You cannot establish the relationship like this, right? Even though if you put this column name as standard ID, this is also not possible. Even though both are having the same name, but the data type is different. Data type is different is means you cannot establish the relationship. So what is mandatory? Now, whenever you are establishing the relationship, right, the data type of the column which you want to make the relationship should be matched. In this case, the data type is integer and here data type is integer. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So according to database normalization, right, we should not store all the information in a single table, right? Now you might be asking, sir, one question. So why I'm going to create a different table? Why I'm not going to store the same? Why I'm not going to store every information in a single table? This is not possible. Why? Now, because of a database normalization. If I'm going to store every information in the single table, right, then there might be some a difficulty, right? There might be some duplication, right? There might be some redundancy data, right? And because of this, right? Because of this, we need to avoid those things, right? So in this case, right? For example, you can say, suppose if I want to include standard ID and standard name, right? For example, here course ID, course name, and teacher ID, right? But in this table, if I want to store the teacher information, right, then I have to include all these things. Teacher first name, last name, and a standard ID. And this is going to be repeat in each column now. So instead of that, what I can store only single value, and then it is, and then I'm using this foreign key, which will establish a relationship with the teacher table. That in this case, we are just going to reduce the dependency, right? We are going to reduce the duplication of the data, right? And further, if you want to know what is exactly database normalization, right? I have written a great detailed article on the same, right? You can visit to that article, right? And once you visit the article, then you will see what is exactly normalization, right? And what exactly the problem as a developer we do and how we can overcome those problems, right? By using database normalization, what are the different form of database normalization, right? Those things you can understand very easily once you visit to this article, right? So database normalization is itself a big topic which is not in our scope, right? So before understanding the different types of a relationship, we need to understand few important terms. What is primary key? We have discussed. What is primary key? The key which is uniquely identify each row in a table is called the primary key. What is foreign key? The foreign key is a column in the table that makes a relationship with another table. The foreign key column should point to the primary key or unique key column of the principal entity, right? And what are so these two things are related to your database. And what is navigation property? This is related to your .NET, right? In .NET, the navigation property defines the types of relationship between the entity. Based on the requirement, these properties are defined either in the principal entity or in the dependent entity, right? So what are, again, the navigation properties are classified into two types. What are these? A reference navigation property, if the relationship with a single related entity, and the collection navigation property means it refers to a collection of entities, right? That means what? Now using this reference navigation property, you can establish a one-to-one relationship, while using this collection navigation property, you can establish one-to-many or many-to-many relationships, right? So this is what you need to understand before going further and understanding the types of relationships, right? So is that clear? What are these primary key, foreign key, navigation properties, principal entity, and a dependent entity, guys?
Yeah. Only how do you establish the relation with the keys for a many to many? That is not very clear.
I will show you. I will show you that. Right? I will show you. Don't worry. How you are establishing the relationship, right? That is what I'm going to show you practically. Already we have established the relationship, but that is how it is managing the relationship. That is what I'm going to show you, right? So Now, once you understand these things, right, then we need to understand the types of a relationship, right? In relational database, there are three types. So actually 4 types of relationship people are saying, but one to many or many to one, this is nothing but same thing. If you are establishing one to many, if you go in the reverse order, it is nothing but many to one, right? So we are having 3 types of a relationship: one to one to many, and many to many. And we have already created this ADMX file, right? We have created this ADMX file already, right? And if you look at this image, right, and here we are establishing all the 3 types of a relationships, right? How you can say, okay, we are establishing the 3 types of a relationship, right? Now let us understand this. Let us first understand one to one, right? One to one means if you look at the student address and the student table, right? So there is a one-to-one relationship between the student and the student address table. You can see in student address, it is having a navigation property called student, and in student address student table, it is a navigation property called student, right? So there is one-to-one relationship between student and the student address table. And here you can see it is saying 0.1 and 1. What do you mean by this? Can anybody tell me? Can anybody tell me what do you mean by this? Okay, right. So what exactly is saying that this is my student entity. This student entity can have 0 or maximum 1 student address. 0 or maximum 1 student address the student entity can have. Clear? This student entity having maximum 0 or 1 student address. It might be possible that the student entity doesn't have any address. If it is having any address, then maximum 1 address. Clear?
Okay, clear. In that case,
And from the reverse order, right? If you want to establish from student address to student, then it is saying student address, right? The student address maximum 1 student, right? The student address belongs to a particular single student, right? It's not possible that I'm having a student address, but there is no student entity. This is not possible. But it is possible that student having 0 address, you are creating one student, and it might be possible that you are not storing that address of that student. But the reverse is not possible. If you are entering one student address, means the student ID must be there, right? And from where you are getting the student ID? From the student table, and maximum 1 student. So in this case, 1 student can have 0 or 1 student address. But if you are having a student address, that should have belongs to a single student. So 0, 1 means either 0 record or 1 record. 1 means maximum 1 record. Clear? So whenever you are saying this 001 or 1, it means it is one-to-one relationship, right? There should not be more than 1 corresponding related records for a particular entity. Clear, guys? Yes, it is possible that 0 entity might be possible, but not more than 1. Clear or still doubt?
Yes, clear. I guess like in student table, like for an example, we have 5 students, but in student address we have only registered like four address. So 4 address
That's
belongs to
possible.
4 student. Yeah,
That's
and the 1
possible,
student doesn't have anything.
right? But whatever 4 address you are entering in the student address table, those 4 address should exist in the student. Those student must and should exist in the student table. Clear? If your student address like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then it's possible that in the student address table you are entering the address for student 1, 2, 3, 4. But it doesn't possible that you are entering student address ID as 7, which is not exist in the student table. This is not possible. Clear?
Yes, clear.
Right? So this is
so
one
the student address, the student address field in the student entity is nullable, right? It could be null.
Sorry? Can you
The
repeat?
student, the student address
Yes.
field in the student entity
Hmm.
could be null. Could be null.
Yes,
I
yes,
mean,
it could be.
it's
It could be
nullable.
not.
It's nullable.
Exactly.
But the
It's
question is, if you
yes.
establish it as not null, then it must be 1-1, right?
So not null in the sense, say, you cannot establish that not null. Why I'm saying, see, if you come to the student and the student address table, right? These are my student and the student address table. Both are independent table, right? This is the my principal entity and this is my dependent entity, right? So it might be it might be possible that I'm entering the address, right? But I'm not entering the sorry, I'm entering the student information, but I just want, yeah, so let allow the student to enter his basic details. Later I can capture his student address. Later I can capture his address. But in that case, what will happen? Now, in this case, you can see if I'm entering one record into this table, right? Let me enter one record and let me give this name as Pranay, right? Let me enter this one, right? If I am entering this record and if I'm not entering the student address, is there any issue?
No.
No, okay, but I was asking if you want to enforce, I mean, to enforce that it must have an address, then you make it not nullable, or you don't do that.
No, no.
But we don't. But we
In
do not
that
have
case,
any column in
right?
student table.
So basically what is that requirement is that you have to enforce that logic you have to set in the database, right? So while entering the data, you have to check whether the user is sending the student address data or not. If he is not sending student address data, then don't allow the student to enter his detail into the student table, right? So see why I'm saying, if you are creating a class, right? Class means how you can make that not null, right? For example, if I'm having one student class, right? So I can create an instance like this now. How you will make this as not null? Is there any provision that you can store, you can make a reference variable as not null? You can make this as not null. Is that possible? Not null, what is means that if you are having some property or column that you can make as not null, you should not store null value on that particular property or particular column. For example, in the student address one, if you want, you can make this property as not null, so that while entering the student address, right, you can restrict that if the user not sending any address value, then don't allow that record to enter into this table, right?
Sir, like he's just like understanding like in student table we have one column which says like address, and in address we can set null, but like actually we do not have any column which says address in student table.
So this is the
Yeah,
reason
you have
why.
address ID. You have address ID in the
No,
student
no,
table.
No,
this
no.
is the reason why. This is the reason why. From the beginning, I'm saying in the database side, to establish the relationship, we are having primary key and foreign key. But in our entities, in the .NET side, we are having the navigation properties, right? So in this case, in the database side, if you want to establish the relationship, then only option is there, foreign keys, right? The student table ID, and you are making that student ID as a foreign key so that it will point to the student table. But in our .NET application, to establish this relationship, we are going with the navigation properties, right? And you cannot ensure, you cannot force that this navigation property should not be not null. Yes, you can check the validation later, right? If this property is null or not null based on the property value, you can do whatever you want, but you cannot force this one. You cannot ensure that this property value should not be not null. Yes, while retrieving the data from the database, right, you can make sure if this property, if the corresponding student address is not exist, then don't paste that record. This provision is there, but how you can make sure that this property should not be not null, right? So if you go to the student entity, right, let me go to the student entity, right? So this is my student entity. So it's just a property. How you will make sure that this is null or not null? right? So you can say student
Okay.
address is a property. So you cannot make sure, you cannot enforce that this property should be not null. This is not possible, right? What is possible while retrieving the data from the database, right? If you want that only those student data I need to retrieve whose student addresses they exist, right? In that case, you can use a inner join, right? And if you perform a inner join, then only the corresponding student address, which student addresses exist, those student data you will get, right? And yes, if you are having, say in this case, you can say this is the integer column. This is not null. And here student standard ID. This is nullable, right? So you can enforce the property, right? So in this case, student address actually not holding the data. Who is holding the data? Whatever property you defined inside the student address, right? Those property, those scalar property are going to hold the data. And those scalar property, if you want, then you can make this property as not null or nullable, right? But if it's a reference type, then you cannot enforce that it should be not null. Yes, for scalar type, right? The primitive type, if integer data type, right? You can ensure that this property should be nullable or not nullable, right? By default, it is not nullable. And if you want to make this as nullable, so simply write this one, right? In this way, it will now allow null value. And if you remove this one, then it will not allow null value. I don't understand why you are still doubt, because what is the default value of a reference data type?
So like he has doubt because like you said now, like in student address, like the student can have address or not have address. So he's assuming like a student table has a foreign key which represents student address table, but actually there is a no column in the student table which address like a student address ID. So
Yeah, there is a
so
column now. In the student
no,
address table, the student ID
no,
is
no.
the column.
He is assuming in student table there is a column which says student address ID. In student table we do not have any kind of column
No,
in student table.
so this is the reason why I'm saying that this is the principal entity, right? So you should
Yes.
not, right? If you know a SQL server, right? So in the case of SQL server or any particular database, if you want to establish the relationship means from one end, not from the both end. Both end means in this case, if you want student address, right? Then in that case, you can make a column here, right? But the problem is that what you know. Suppose if you are assuming that I want the student address ID as a reference column in this table, right? Suppose
Yes.
if this is your requirement, right? If you are making this as a reference key, then you just tell me what is the problem, right? And let me assume that this student table having some ID column. Let's assume that, right? So, right? Let's assume that the student table having this ID column and the relationship between these two is this one, right? Now you just tell me. First of all, tell me, can I enter a student information in this table which is not exist in the student table?
No, we cannot insert the record actually.
Because for inserting into this table, first of all, I need the student ID. Yes or no? If the student ID is not exist in the student table, means I cannot enter that record inside this table. Yes or no?
Yes.
Right. Now you just tell me, I'm making this as a foreign key. Can I enter a record into the student table without student address?
No.
Then in this case, am I able to enter any record in any of the database table?
No, we can't.
Right? So this is the see, if you want to establish a relationship between two tables, then one of the database table, right, will have the foreign key which is pointing to the your principal entity or the primary key table you can consider, right? But it should not be having both the table having the foreign key pointing to each other. If that is the scenario, then it's not possible to enter a single record into the table, right? Here it is expecting the student ID must be exist. Here it is expecting the student ID must be exist. And in this case, none of the table can enter any record. right? They cannot insert, they cannot allow us to enter any record in any of the table, right? This is the reason why your foreign key should have in one of the table, right? So this is the reason why I'm saying from the beginning. So what is this? So dependent entity, principal entity. Principal entity means it's the primary table or primary key table. It doesn't have any dependent, right? You can insert the record independently inside this table. Dependent entity means what? If you are trying to insert record into this table, then it should have a dependent on the principal table, right? The record what you are trying to insert, that record first should must exist in the principal table, right? So in this case, that is what you can see here, right? Independently, you can insert the record into the student table. There is no issue, right? But while, and this is the principal table, but while entering the data into the student address table, right, the dependency is there, right? The entry, the record what you are trying to insert, that should be exist in the student table. If the record is not exist, then you cannot insert data into this table. This is the reason why I'm saying the student table, if you are entering the data into the student table, if you are not entering the student address, that is fine. So this is the reason why I'm saying 0, 1, right? The student having 0 address or 1 address. But if you are entering 1 address, means that student must be exist, right? There should be a one-to-one relationship. Clear?
Yeah, I see it now. I had it wrong. I had it wrong. It's okay. Now I see it.
Understood now? See, both you
Yeah,
cannot put
yes.
the relationship in both the table. You cannot make that, right? If you make that thing, then you cannot enter any record, right? Okay. So this is one-to-one relationship, and you can see in this in our database how we can make the one-to-one relationship. If we make the primary key as the foreign key, right, in database, right? In this case, you can see this is my primary key as well as I'm making this as the foreign key, right? And this is how you can implement the one-to-one relationship in your database, right? And the second one is, and if you look at our DMX file, then you should see student and student address, right? You can see 0, dot, dot, 1 and 1. That means the student having 0 or 1 corresponding address, and the student address must have 1. If it is saying 0, dot, dot, 1, then you can see student having 0 or 1 address, but it is not saying 0. It is saying 1 means at least or maximum 1 address is there, right? The second relation type that what we need to understand is one to many. One to many, right? One to many means you can see there are many relationship which representing one to many. You can see the relationship between, okay, let me teacher and course, right? In teacher and course, you can see one to many. So here star represent many and 0, dot, dot, 1 means it is 1, right? So in this case, what is, so can anybody tell me by looking at the symbol 0, dot, dot, 1 and star, what should be the relationship between teacher and course?
One to many.
One to many, that I understand, but what is where is one, where is many?
Course will be
One
many.
course, every
There will
course
be
must
at
have a
least
teacher.
course ID
but-
is compulsory.
See, every course, right? In this case, every course, at least 0 or 1 teacher, right? See, the each course having 0 or maximum 1 teacher, right? 0 or 1 means what? This course should belongs to a particular teacher, or it might be possible that this course, right, this subject is not assigned to any teacher. Clear?
But here in course table, we have one column which says teacher ID. So like when we enter any course, right? So at that time we need to enter like any teacher ID. So like if you do not enter, then only possible like a 0 to like a 0 on the teacher side. But how it can possible?
Sorry?
Teacher ID null, teacher ID null.
The
That's what I
teacher
was
ID,
telling.
if you are entering the teacher ID as null, then what will happen? It's possible that you can enter the teacher ID as null.
But
Yeah, because
primary,
the course,
But primary, like a teacher ID in the teacher table is a primary key, right? So primary key shouldn't be null.
What I'm saying, see, if you belongs to the first concept, right? So what I'm saying, primary key, or it should not be that the reference key which is pointing to the principal entity, that principal entity column should be primary key. It might be a unique key, right? If it's a unique key, then it can contain a single null value. If it contains a single null value, then in the foreign key column, you can insert null value, right? So if the column is, if the reference column, right, what the foreign key pointing to, it's a primary key, then it will not allow null value. But if that column is a unique key, then what will happen? Then it will accept null value, right? If it accepts a null value, then in the foreign key column, you can enter null value.
Yeah, that is right.
Right? So it is not restriction that the foreign key should point to the primary key column, right? It's possible that it might be pointing to the foreign, the unique key column. If it is pointing to unique key column, then it can accept a single null value, right? If the unique, if that accept a single null value, then while entering the data into the foreign key table, then you can also enter null values. And if you are entering null value, that means the corresponding address is null, right? The corresponding entity is null. This is the reason why it is saying 0 or dot dot 1. Clear?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And from the teacher table, right, it's possible, let's say, suppose in your academic, right, it might be possible that you are having a different subject, right? C, C++, Java, right? C means what? Now, one of the teacher is going to teach the subject C. But it's possible that the same teacher, what he is teaching C, right? That particular teacher also might be possible that also going to take the subject C++, right? So in this case, that is what represent each subject or each course going to be taken by a single teacher, but a single teacher can teach multiple subjects, right? This is the reason why you can see star here, right? Each course belongs to a particular teacher, but each course might belongs to a 0 or 1 teacher, but each teacher can have multiple courses. Clear?
Yeah, that is right. But if you go into SQL Server and if you check the design of teacher table, then for the teacher ID, we have set do not allow nulls.
Right? See what
So
exactly.
it cannot be.
So in this case, if we are setting this as primary key, then 0 will not come into the picture. But if you set this as unique key, then 0 will come into the picture.
Okay.
Right? So
Yeah.
both options are available. So this is the reason why it is saying 0 dot dot 1. This is not the SQL representation of this relationship. This is the .NET representation of the database relationship in the ADMX model, right? Here you cannot see the, what I can say here, you cannot see the primary key and the foreign key relationship. What you will see here, you will see the navigation properties, right? So in the teacher table, you can say courses. It is not a course, it is represented by courses. Courses means it is a pluralized form. And in the course table, you can see this is the teacher. Teacher means it is the singularized form, right? And you can also see the teacher and standard table. There is also one-to-many relationships, right? And you can see the student and standard table. There is also one-to-many relationships. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right? And then there is, and finally, we need to understand the many-to-many relationship, right? Let me put that here. Okay. So you can drag drop, you can resize as per your requirement, right? Wherever you want, you can do these things, right? So now you can see there is a many-to-many relationship between the student and the course table, right? So in the student table, you are having star, and in the course table, you are having star. That means what? Now one student can have multiple courses, and one course can be taken by multiple students. So as there is multiplicity, so you can say this is represented by star and star. So there is student and there is course. Now you might be have one question, sir, how this many-to-many relationship is established, right? So if you go and student and the course table, right, student and the course database, right? So where is student? This is my student database. So in this student, this is my student database. And if you go to the course table, right, this is my course database, right? So in this table, right, you can see course ID, course name, teacher ID. In this table, you can see student ID, first name, last name, standard ID. There is no link between them. Is there any foreign key column which is pointing to each other? Is there any foreign key which is pointing to the student table, or does the student table having any foreign key which is pointing to the course table?
No.
No. Then how it is maintaining this? Right? That is the point that we need to understand. Right? So basically, whenever you want to implement the many-to-many relationship, you need to introduce one intermediate table. Right? You need to introduce one intermediate table, or you can say link table, or you can say the joining table, which should contain the primary key of course table as well as student table. Is there any such table in our database?
Yes, class table.
This one. So in this case, you can see this is the student ID and this is the course ID, right? This is the student ID, this is the course ID. Student ID pointing to the student table, student ID column, course ID pointing to the course table, course ID column. So this student course table, right? It is nothing but it is a third table, right? Which makes the relationship between the student and the course table as many-to-many relationships, right? And in this case, you do not need to insert any record in this table, right? By default, whenever you entered one record into the student table, or whenever you record, right, so it is going to maintain all this. There is no additional column, right? Nothing is there. Only the primary key of student table, only the primary key of course table, right? If you enter some other column, right, then it is not going to maintain the many-to-many relationships, right? So this joining table, right, you can say it is establishing the many-to-many relationship between the student and the course table, right? And if you go to the ADMX, right, then you will not find that entity here. You will not find that student course entity here, right? Is there any entity whose name is student course, what we have created here? Right? Why that entity is not available here? Because we are not going to do any kind of operations to insert the data inside this table. The entity framework will take care of this thing, right? Whenever you are entering one student entity and course entity, right, then that combination is going to be inserted inside that table, right? So, and that table relationship is implemented here as many-to-many, right? So if you go to the right, so to make you understand this thing, right, let me open that XML view, right? So you will not find that entity in the CSDL, SSDL documentation, but in the mapping layer, you will find this one, right? So let me open that XML text editor, right? In the storage model, you will see that entity is not there, right? That entity is not there, right? In the conceptual model also, you will not find that entity. You will see course entity, standard entity, right? The student entity, student address entity, teacher entity, right? But you will not find that student course entity, right? So you will not find that student course entity. But that entity information is provided in this mapping layer, right? So this is course, this is standard, this is student address, this is teacher, and this is student course. And in this case, this is the entity, in this case, the course, right? Course ID belongs to the course table, and student ID belongs to the student table, right? So the mapping information is provided here, but this entity is not defined there, because you are not going to use this entity to insert some data. Why? Now see, if I do not have any data, suppose the student table contains some student number from 1 to 10 and the course table contains some number from 1 to 10, then if I'm trying to insert student ID 14, course ID 15, and if I'm trying to insert the data into this table, then if this table having some data, right, which does not exist at all in the student and the course table, right? So in this case, right, so he is not allowing you to perform any kind of a CRUD operation on the student table. And this is the reason why the student course table, right, is not available as an entity, right? But the mapping information is there, right? And which allows us to make the relationship as what I can say, many to many, right? Now, if you go to the now, if you open the ADMX file, then you will see that student course table is not there, but the mapping, the relationship is there, right? Now, if you go to the model browser, right? Open the model browser, right? Then you can see here, everything is there. Course student, student address, student course is there, right? This is the database. In database, this is there, right? And where is our model? In model, this is not there. So in entity model, this is our .NET and this is our database. In database, the student course table is there, but in our entity type, this is not there. Clear? And in association, you can see these are the things, and this student course is nothing but the foreign key, right? What is automatically established for that mapping information. Someone asked me, "Na, what is this?" So this is nothing but the mapping information what I have shown you in the CS model. That is nothing but this one, right? This makes the relationship between the student and the course table. I mean, this is just like a foreign key, right? So this is just like a foreign key which combined these two keys, right? So this is how.
But maybe you should have an entity. Maybe you should have an entity, because what happens if you want to keep the qualification, the result of the course for the student? Okay, what grade he got? Where do you keep that information? In the student course, or where do you keep it?
So see, first of all, you just tell me what is the use of this entity in our class? In our model, is there a need of this in class?
No, because you are not keeping the grades. But if you want to keep the grades, what would you do?
See, if you want, see, I'm saying now, if you introduced a third column, right? Suppose I'm entering some other column.
Grade,
Once,
the grade he got, the final note he got in
okay,
the course.
you
Grade.
introduced a grade column, right? So once you introduce this grade column, right, then it will not make the that foreign key relationship, right? It will not to make that one many to many relationships. In this case, it will create the student course as a what I can say, it's an entity, and in this course, student course, it will make the relationship between the student column, right, student table and the course table, but it will not make that as many to many relationship, right? So in this case, it will create as a entity because you are introducing some other column, and in that column right now you will not find that many to many relationship between the student and the course table, right? It only the many to many relationship only introduced when you are having two columns, right, which are pointing to the primary column of two different table, and if no additional column is there. If additional column is there, then it will create like a what I can say, it is just create like a normal table, and in this case there is one to many relationship with the student table and one to many relationship with this course table, right?
Yeah, I guess. But
Right.
I still,
So you just try this. You just try.
I've used that.
You just
Mhm.
try this. So what I'm saying, right? So it's just a demo. It is just a research, right? Why I'm saying I have already done this, right? So you just make one changes in your script, just introduce this grade column, and then figure out, right, whether you are having these things or not. Okay. So just use this one and then check what is happening, whether the one-to-one, whether the many-to-many relationship is there or that relationship is gone, and this table is introduced. Just try this by your end, right?
Okay.
So you just do it and you will see what is the changes and whether you are seeing that star mark or not. You will not see the star and star. There is no relationship now between the student and course table. Yes, there is relationship between student and this student course and this course and student course table. And this what relationship you are seeing here, this will not be there. It will be only there when you do not have any additional column. Right? So I have tried this. You just tried this by your end. So these are the different types of relationships, right, that you can find in .NET, right? And we have already discussed. This is how you are going to represent by using the navigation properties, right? Navigation property in the sense it might be your reference navigation property or it might be a collection navigation property. To represent a one-to-one relationship, it is going to use reference navigation property, and to represent many relationship one to many or many to many, it is going to use the collection navigation property. Clear, guys?
Okay.
Right. So next,
Yeah, can you go into your EDMX? Yeah, and the student and the course. Yeah, so like I tried, like I created a new column which says grades on student course, and I created the new project, and it's introduced a new tables, and there is no like a many-to-many relationship.
now you clear?
Yeah.
Right. So that is what. See, if you want to represent this relationship, means what? There should not be any additional column. If additional column, a new entity will be there, and the relationship between the student and that new right, student and student course and course student course will be there. But this relationship will not be there. Right. So this is what I'm saying. Right. So why I'm not introduced that new column here? Now I just want to make sure, right, the how the many to many relationship is represented. We have already created many, right? In this case, you can see many reference key, foreign key column we have already created, right? So I just want to show you the many to many relationship. That's why I'm not including. That's why I'm not introducing any new columns, right? So now we can go proceed, and now we can proceed further and try to understand the CRUD operation, how you can perform in using database first approach. We have already discussed this thing, right? But again, I'm going to show you the changes, right? So if you want to perform the CRUD operation, right, Entity Framework is going to generate okay, he's sending the screen, he's attaching the image, right?
Yes. So
Okay, let me open that image.
so on student course, I created that
Yes,
grades
you can
column.
see student course is there, right? Now you can see the student course having the relationship, not this,
No,
not
that
this
is
one.
student right side. Yeah.
Yeah, this one. Now you can see the student and the course table. There is no relationship between student and course. Rather, now student course having a relationship with the course table and having a relationship with the student table. There is no star and star between student and the course. Clear, guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So now we are going to discuss how we can perform the CRUD operation using Entity Framework, right? So we have already discussed, based on the state of an entity, the Entity Framework is going to generate the respective TML state. If the entity state is in added, if the entity is in added state, it is going to generate the insert command. If it is in modified state, it is going to generate the update command. If the entity is in deleted state, right, it is going to generate the delete command. And this is going to be happen only on the context object. It is just changing, right? And whenever you call the step changes method, the respective command are generated and executed on the database, right? So let me show you this thing one by one. We have already discussed these things, so it should not take that much of time to explain you, right? So this is my new entity I have created. Let me close this one. Let me make this bold, right? So in this case, this is my new entity. I'm creating the context object, right? The session is started from here. I'm attaching the new entity to the context object by using the add method of the DbSet class, right? And once I call this add method, what will be the state of this entity? The entity state will be in added state, right? And you can check the state by calling the entry method on the context object by passing the newly created student and fetch the state property. This is going to return you the current state of the entity, right? And if you want to log the whatever the SQL statement is going to be generated by the context object or going to be generated by the entity framework, then you need to use this statement, right? Context.database.log. Whatever the database SQL script is generated by the context object, please log that statement inside the console window. This is the meaning of this statement, right? And whenever I call this step changes method, this newly added entity, right, will be added into the database. And after the entity is added, the state will be changed to unchanged, right? Let me first show you how many, right, how many students are there in our database. 4 students are there, right? Let me run this application. We have already discussed these things many times, right? So what is the use of this add method and how the state is going to be changed, right? So you can see before step changes entity state added, right? What this statement exactly does is it will log when the connection is established, when the transaction is started. It will log what SQL statement is executed on the database. It will log the time when the connection, when the transaction is completed, and it will log the time when the connection is closed, right? So in this case, you can see open the connection. Connection is opened as this time. Okay, let me copy these things to the notepad and show you in a bigger size, right? So now you can see what this statement is doing. So the connection is opened at this particular time. Transaction is started at this particular time. This is the SQL statement which is generated, right? And then the transaction is committed at this particular of time, and the connection is closed at this particular of time. So this SQL statement, what is generated and executed by the entity framework, it is taking 14 milliseconds, right? In 14 milliseconds, this statement is going to be executed, and this statement is executed by using the concept called SQL data reader, right? You already guys know what is SQL data reader. There is SQL data reader. That SQL data reader having some method, right? Execute query, execute non-query, execute scalar, execute reader, right? By using any of the method, by using this SQL data reader, right? Internally framework executing this statement, right? So this is the information you can see, and how much time it is taking to execute the statement means 14 milliseconds. When and what are the things it is done internally? It is the context class internally open the connection, started the transaction, generate the SQL statement, execute the SQL statement, then commit the transaction, right? Then close the connection. These are the things which is done by the context object, right? Now, as we have execute one statement, right? So you can see when we add the entity to the context object, so it is in added state. And once the SQL statement executed and once the database is saved, the state is changed to unchanged, right? Now you can go and check the newly added student inside this table. What is the ID? 17, and this is the information. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right? What exactly the context object does? Is that clear?
Yes.
Right? So these are the things which is going to be performed by the context object, right? And next. Next, the update operation, and for updating the operation, right? Right. So in the connected scenarios, right? So whatever as of now we are discussing, this is nothing but your connection oriented scenario. In this case, the context object, within the scope of the context object, we are performing everything, right? Right. So whenever we are going, right? So what we can say, whenever we edit any data, right, the entity framework all right, right, automatically mark the state, right, automatically mark the state as what? Guys, tell me. Whenever we
Modified.
are editing, the entity framework automatically mark the entity state as modified, right?
Modified.
And whenever we call the save changes method, right, then what will be the
Update.
query it is going to generate? It is going to generate the update SQL statement, right? So let me run what is the row ID. Row ID 3 is Sanju Samson, right? Let me update that value with KL Rahul. Even I don't like KL Rahul, still I'm putting that name, right? So how many of you guys like KL Rahul?
I don't like it.
Right? But I like Sanju Samson rather than KL Rahul. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so here I'm first fetching the student, right? Can anybody tell me what is the what this find method is going to do?
Basically, it's fetching the data from the database based on that primary key, like a
Exactly.
ID.
Right. So before fetching the data from the database, right, first it will check whether that entity, right, whose primary key is 3 is available in the context object or not. If it is available in the context object, then it is going to return the data from the context object, right? And if it is not available, then it is going to the database and fetching the data, right? Because the first level of caching is provided by the context object, right? Once it returns the data from the database, it will store in the cache memory. And if you are retrieving the same data again, then instead of going to the database, it will return the data from the cache. Clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Right? If you are not sure, let me do one thing. I'm putting this console database log statement here, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm fetching the same data one more time, right? I'm fetching the same data one more time, right? If it is not fetching the data from the cache memory, right, then it should generate how many select statements? 2 select statement, right? If it is fetching the data from the context memory, then first time it is fetching the data from the database, 1 select statement should be there, and second time it is fetching the data from the cache, so no more select statement should be there. So if it is logging 1 select statement, that means it is second time it is fetching the data from the cache, right? If it is logging 2 select statement, that means in both the time it is going to the database and fetching the data, right? So here what I'm saying, before updating the entity state, it should be unchanged. And once I'm updating the values, right, I'm putting the, again I'm printing the entity state, and in this state, in this case, the entity state should be modified. And when we call the save changes method, right, the entity state again change to unchanged, right? Now let me run the application. Right. So this is connection open. This is one select statement, right? And then close the connection, right? So you can say as soon as your execution is completed, it is closed the connection. Then how many times the select statement is fired? One time or two time? Guys, how many times the select statement is fired?
One time.
One time.
One time means second time from where it is getting the data?
Cache memory.
Context.
From the context object, or you can say context object cache, right? From the cache it is fetching the data, right? And one more thing, guys, you need to remember, for each and every statement while it is executing, it is opening the connection and it is closing the connection as soon as the select statement or whatever the SQL statement execution is completed. And whenever you are executing any select statement, what it means the database is not going to be updated. We are just fetching the data, and in that case it is not using any kind of a transaction, right? So you can see connection open, execute the select statement, close the connection. And first, what should be the state of the entity? Whenever you are fetching the data, it is unchanged. Whenever you modify the data, Entity Framework track that data. So the column is updated. So once the column is updated, right, at least one column is updated, then it is changing the entity state as modified. Then you can see it is open the connection. As in this case, it is a modified state. It is going to generate the update SQL statement. So it is starting the transaction, right? Once the transaction is started, you can see the update statement is there. Then commit the transaction, then close the transaction. And after the save changes method, again, the state is changed to unchanged. And here you can see it is using, it is executing this query within 4 milliseconds, right? And one more point that you need to remember, guys, the entity framework, the context object is tracking whichever column are going to be changed, whichever column value you have changed, right? And while updating the data, right, you can see only those columns are coming to the picture. You have changed the first name, last name, so it is including the first name and last name column. You have not changed the standard ID, so it is not include that standard ID column in the update statement, right? And based on the primary key column value, it is going to update the data. So here, this is nothing but your first parameter, this is nothing but your second parameter, and this is nothing but your third parameter, right? So in this case, what is the value of first parameter? KL, right? What is the value of the second parameter? This is Rahul. What is the parameter of what is the value of third parameter? It is 3. So in this case, this is string, this is string, this is integer. What is the maximum size of this parameter? 100. What is the maximum size of this parameter? 100, right? And from where it is getting the value? From the database only, right? If you go to the database, right, then you will see that in the student table, right? Where is the student table, right? We have mentioned the size of the first name and the last name. Clear? Right?
Yes.
So are you able to understand this code now?
Yes.
Right? So this is the statement which is going to be generated by the .NET or generated by the context object. Right now, once you modify the data, right now you can verify whether that record 3 is updated or not. Execute this statement. Yes, 3 is updated. Clear?
Yes.
Right? So whenever, right, whenever you have the primary key column, right, and if you want to find that value, right, then you should use find method, right? Instead, other options are there, first method, first or default, right, where clause, right, many options are there. But if you know the primary key column, then it is better to use find method because it is going to use the context object cache. Now we are going to perform the delete operation. We know how to perform the delete operation, right? Right. So performing the delete operation is very little bit, I mean, challenge. It is not challenging, but here you need to remember 2 things, right? So using this context class, right, this remove method, right, we can remove, right? So here you need to understand 2 things, right? Right. Added object, newly added object. Suppose you have added one newly added entity, right, not existing in the database. Existing entity, right? So existing entity. So you have 2 options. You have created one entity. You have added that entity into the data into the context object by calling the add method, right? Add that entity, and but you have not called the save changes method. Right? So you have created one entity, you have added entity into the context object, but you have not called the save changes method. As you have not called the save changes method, is that entity is existing in the database or added into the database?
No.
No. So, but what will be the state of that entity?
Added state.
Added state, right? If using the remove method, right, you can remove that entity. You can remove that newly added entity, right? If you call the remove method, then what will happen? It will mark the entity state as detached. It will mark the entity state as detached. Why it will mark the entity state as detached directly? Because this entity is not exist in the database, so no need to call the save changes method, right? Because if it is exist in the database, then you have to call the save changes method. If you call the save changes method, the entity is going to be deleted from the database and all these things, right? So this is in the case of, right? So whenever you call the remove method, then it will mark the entity state as detached, right? If it is an existing entity, right? If it is an existing entity, and whenever you call the remove method, right? On existing entity, if you call the remove method, then what should be the state? Entity state will be deleted. And when you call the save changes method, right? The entity is going to be deleted from the database. And then after save changes method, entity state will be what? Entity state will be what?
Detached.
Right? So this is the point that you need to remember, right? So you can call this remove method on the newly added entity on the existing entity. If the newly added entity which is not saved in the database, if you call the remove method, then it will mark that entity state as detached. If an existing entity, and when you call the remove method, then it will mark the entity state as deleted. And this deleted means only the entity state, not from the database. And when you call the save changes method, right, that entity is going to deleted from the database. And once the save changes method execution completed successfully, then it will mark the entity state as detached. In this case, no need to call the save changes method, right? Why no need to call? Why no need to? No need to call the save changes method? Because if you call the save changes method, thus it is going to do with the entities which are having detached on unchanged state.
No, it is not going to track.
It is going to generate the insert, update, delete statement only when the entity state is in added, modified, or deleted state. Apart from this three state, any other state, it is not going to do anything, right? Unchanged means it is not going to generate any code. And whenever detached means one entity context object, forget about this entity. Forget about entity framework not tracking this entity. Detached means what? In context object is not tracking that particular entity. If it is not tracking, then it is not going to do anything with that entity. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So in this case, I have created one entity. Right. I'm printing this statement. Whatever, if it is going to generate some SQL statement, that is going to be printed on the console. Right. I'm adding that entity. At this point, what should be the state? In this case, what should be the state of the entity?
Added state.
Added state, right? And here I'm calling the remove method. So what should be the entity state at this point? First, it will check whether this is an existing entity which is existing in the database, or it is a newly added entity. Guys,
It's a new entity.
Newly added.
Newly added. Is this entity existing in the database? Did you call the save changes method?
No.
So if this entity is not exist in the database, and whenever you call the remove method, so it is going to not set the entity state as deleted, it is going to set the entity state as detached. Deleted is only going to be set whenever that entity exists in the database. In this case, entity not exist in the database, so it is directly going to state, you can say it is going to directly set the entity state as detached. All right. So in this case, it is going to set the entity state as detached. And if you call the save changes method, nothing going to be happen, because this entity state is detached. On the detached entity state, nothing is going to be happen, right? Let me run this application. right? So no SQL statement is generated, first attached, then detached. Clear?
Yes.
Right? Now, if it is an existing entity, then the steps what we understand, right? Those things will come into the picture, right? First, it will move that entity into deleted state, and when you call the save changes method, then it is going to delete the entity, right? Let me first fetch the student ID, which one we have added, 17, right? So we need to remove that student, right? 17. Entity state before removing, right? Entity state before removing. So first, just tell me, in this case, what should be the entity state? Whenever you fetch any data from the database, by default, the state is going to be unchanged, right? And when you call the remove method, what should be the entity state? Entity state, as this is an existing entity, it is not a new entity, it is an existing entity, so the entity state will be deleted, right? And you, if you want to see, right, what SQL statement is going to be generated while deleting the data, right, then you can write this statement, and whenever you call the save changes method, that particular entity is going to delete from the database, and once that entity is deleted from the database, the entity state will be converted back to detached state, right? Now run the application. So first it will show you unchanged, right? Unchanged, then the entity state is deleted, then it is going to generate the delete command, which is going to delete the entity based on the primary key, and then the entity state is changed to detached. Clear?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is how you can perform the what I can say, insert, update, and delete operation. And read operation we have already discussed many times. Many times read means you just need to fetch the data from the database, right? So in this case, I'm just fetching all the record from the database using a for each loop. I'm printing the data, right? And what SQL statement it generates to fetch the data, that is what I'm printing here, right? So let me run this application. Right, so you can see this is the select statement for the read operation, and in this case it is using SQL data reader to read all the data from the database, and here you can see this is the data. So this is how you can perform the insert, update, and delete operations along with the CRUD operation in data using Entity Framework database first approach. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Any question from anyone related to this CRUD operation, how you can perform?
No.
Right? So bulk functionality is there that we will discuss later, right? Not now, right? So how you can perform the bulk insert, update, and delete things, right? Now also we will discuss something detailed in our LinQ queries, right? But I'm just going to give you a flavor, right? What you can do with Entity Framework, right? Insert, update, delete is very simple, right? For performing the insert, update, delete, nothing more you need to do. If you are having a single entity, you can insert, update, delete the way we have performed. But most of the times we need to perform the select operation, right? Select operation by doing some kind of filtration, some kind of ordering, right? Sometimes we need to do some joining operations, right? Sometimes we need to provide a different projection, different result set to the user, right? And for that purpose, we need to understand how to query using Entity Framework, right? So basically, whenever you are working with the Entity Framework, right, you need to understand the LinQ queries, right? So LinQ to entity queries, you need to understand, and using this LinQ to entity queries, or you can say LinQ, right? You can use Entity Framework and you can do many different kind of operations, right? So now we'll understand what exactly this LinQ to entity queries, right? And understand in the sense, I'm just going to give you a brief idea, right? Again, if you are not still understanding what I'm going to do now, right, no worry, because in our LinQ session, right, once you complete this Entity Framework, once you start discussing in LinQ, everything we are going to discuss in detail. But I just now to give you one hint that what exactly you can do with the LinQ and the combination of a LinQ and the Entity Framework, what you can do, That is what I'm going to discuss, right? So the entity framework DbSet class is derived from ICORable interface, right? So in this case, if you go to the definition of entities, and if you go to the definition of a DbSet, then you will see that the definition of this saying that the ICORable interface, it is inheriting from I enumerable, right? So the DbSet class is derived from ICORable. As it is derived from the ICORable interface, so we can use LinQ query for querying against the DbSet, right? So as it is inherited from the ICORable, so you can use LinQ because LinQ implement ICORable. So you can use ICORable to use against the DbSet instance, right? And then once you query using the DbSet using the LinQ, then the corresponding SQL query is going to be generated and executed by the context object in the database, and again it is going to return the result, and that result is going to be converted into .NET objects, right? So this is what is basically LinQ to entity. And again, if you want, I'm not going to discuss this thing in detail. If you still have some query, no worry, right? If you are having query, then don't worry. We'll discuss this thing again in detail, right? So what is LinQ? LinQ means it is a language integrated query. It is a part of a .NET language, but not a complete language. It is a part of a .NET language, and this is introduced by .NET Framework in 3.5 with C# 3.0, right? .NET Framework, if you are using .NET Framework 3.5, right, then you can use this one. So we are using .NET Framework 6.2. So we can use this. LinQ provide us with a common query syntax, which allows us to query the data from various data sources, right? So if you are having a SQL Server database, right, if you want to fetch some data, then you need to use SQL query, right? Similarly, if you are having different data sources, right, you are having SQL Server database, you are having MySQL database, you are having ADO.NET data sets, you are having XML documents, right? If you are having some in-memory objects like some kind of a list of employees, list of students, some collections, right? Then you can use this entity, you can use this LinQ to query, right? So the way we are using this LinQ query with the XML document or with the collections framework with the context object, right? The same way, right? You do not need to write a different query to working with the SQL Server database, different query to working with the XML document, a different query to working with the in-memory object. No need to do this thing. You have to write a single query, and based on the sources, right, based on the corresponding data sources, it is going to generate the required SQL statements, right? So again, if you are still confusing, we'll discuss this thing in detail with some practical, with some pictorial representation, with some diagram, right? We'll discuss this thing again in detail. While working with the LinQ, we need to understand something called projection. Projection means what are the things you want to project, right? So if you are having a table, right? In that table, if you are having 10 columns, right? If you are writing the select statement, it is possible that you can fetch some of the columns. It is possible that you can fetch some of the other columns, right? So in this case, you can see I'm fetching some all the columns, right? So what I can do is I can write like this: first name and the last name, right? So last name. So now it is going to return me only first name and last name column, right? So suppose there is some standard ID column is there. Standard ID column, right? You can also fetch this one, right? Now, if you want to add this standard ID column with some value 100, then you can write like this, right? Now you can see some value 100 is added. That means what? Now, if you want to represent the output in a different format, right? So a different format means some kind of operations you want to perform like this. If you want to filter, if you are not interested with all the columns, right? If you want to fetch some different column, you want to give a different name to the column, right? Like this, right? So these kind of things we can do using SQL, right? Again, the same thing we can do by using the concept called the projection, right? So projection is nothing but the mechanism which is used to select data from a data source. You can select the data in the same form, that is the original data in its original state. It is also possible to create a new form of data by performing some operation on it. For example, you are having an employee table. In the employee table, you are having a salary column, right? Now what the requirement is, so you want to paste the original salary column, as well as you need to give a bonus of 1 lakh to the employees, right? Then you need to paste the salary with the bonus as a different column, right? That is nothing but you are doing some you are performing some operation on the column data, right? And once you do the operation of the column data, that means you are just changing the original data, and you want to represent that that changing data to a different way, right? That is what you are going to do using this concept called the projection, right? And while working with LinQ, there are many methods available. Some of the methods are first default, single default, two list, count, mean, max, sum, dist, average. Many methods are available. That what we are going to discuss in detail in our LinQ sessions, right? Not now. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you some of the examples, right? How you are going to use the LinQ queries. Again and again, I'm saying this is just the hint, right? What you can use, how you are going to use, but again, LinQ we are going to discuss in detail, right? So in this case, so this is faster default, right? If you go to the definition of this one, go to the definition, this is a method, right? And if you know, so this operator means what is this? So whenever you are creating a static method, right? And if you are saying this is a static class, within a static class, if you are creating a static method and the first property is this property, that means what kind of a method is this? Can anybody tell me?
Extension method.
Exactly. So this is nothing but an
Extension.
extension method, right? So LinQ methods are implemented as an extension method, right? So in this case, this is nothing but one extension method. What this extension method is going to do is, so in this case, the student database table can have many employees with the first name as Rohit. It's possible that you are having more than one employee with the first name as Rohit. So in this case, our requirement is to fetch the data from the employee table, or fetch the first record from the employee table, whose first name is Rohit. Only one record. If you are having multiple records, don't go to fetch all the record whose name is Rohit. Only fetch the first record from the top, right, whose first name is Rohit, right? So in this case, first or default. What is meant by first or default? So it will fetch the data first record from the database whose name is Rohit. If this record is not available in the database, then set the default value of this object, right? So what is the student? Students, it means it is representing the student entity. What is the type of the student entity? It's a reference type. So as it's a reference type, what is the default value? The default value is going to be set here, right? So in this case, what exactly it is going to do? If the student is not empty, right, it is going to print the first name. If this is not null, it is going to print the last name, right? So this is one method. Another method is their first method. So in this case, again, whatever functionality we are achieving using this first method, we can achieve also faster default method. We can also achieve using the first method, right? Now, if you run the application, then it will show you the name, right? It will show you the first name and last name as expected, right? First name and last name as expected. Now you might have one question, sir. If both are doing the same thing, then what is the difference between them? Yes, there is some difference, right? So in this case, if you are making two and if you are making two, in this case, there is no employee, there is no student whose name is first. So in this case, it will set the default value. It will set the default value. In this case, you will not it will not give any kind of a runtime error. But in this case, as there is no employee with the first name as Rohit 2, so as in this case, it is going to throw one runtime exception, right? Now let me run the application and see which method is throwing the runtime exception, right? So in this case, you can see first name, last name, these are empty because By default, it is not going to throw any error. It is setting the default value. But in this case, you can see it is throwing one element. Sequence contains no elements. That means whatever data source you are using here, right? This sequence does not contain any elements, right? In this case means this condition, what you have specified with this condition, it is containing 0 elements. That's why it is throwing the error. So now if someone asks you what is the difference between fast or faster default, the faster default handles the null reference exception whenever no matched record found with the given condition. And in this case, if the given condition having no record found in the data source, it is going to throw me one runtime error. Clear?
Okay.
Yes.
Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So this
Yes.
is
Yes.
so like this. There are so many methods which are we are going to use, right? So parameterized query. So there is something called parameterized query, right? It's not always possible that you are going to hard coded the value, right? Sometimes you will get the data from a different source, right? And based on the data, if you want to fetch the right record, that is also possible. So in this case, it is Rohit, right? Rohit, I'm declaring a variable and I'm using that variable here. So in this case, what the SQL server will write, what the context object will do, it will generate a parameterized query, right? Parameterized query in the sense the value is not hard coded in the select statement, rather it is going to use the parameterized query. Now let me run the application and show you the SQL statement, right? So in this case, you can see select top one student ID, first name, standard ID, extend one, where this, right? So you can see first name equals to this is p len q 0, right? So this is nothing but or p len q is null, right? So why it is saying this is 0 or null or this is 0? Because you are using the first or null means it might be searched with the first name as whatever value or first name as null. So in this case, this is nothing but your parameter. And what value you are setting for that parameter? You are setting that value is Rohit. So in this case, it is using the parameterized query. Clear? If you are using parameter, then it is going to use parameterized query. If you are hard coding the value, right? Now let me show you this thing also. Right? And see what statement it is going to generate. Right? So you can see it is directly using Rohit. So it is not using the parameterized query. So based on the way you are specifying the value, it might be generate the plain TSQL statement or it might be generate the parameterized query. Clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So toList method we have already discussed. Basically, like toList, you can also use a toArray, toDictionary, right? So basically, once you execute this statement, right? So let me give you one hint. So in this case, the context object will generate the query, and this toList method will convert that result into a list collection, right? So list of what I can say. Right? So you can say student and you need to include the namespace using system dot collections dot generic. Right? So it is going to convert that to toList. Similar to toList, you might be convert to array to dictionary, right? Based on your requirement, right? So we'll discuss those things in detail once we start discussing the len queues, right? So in this case, you can see I'm fetching only one record, right? Where standard ID equals to 1, right? Now what I'm saying, where standard ID is greater than 1, right? So I'm just changing the condition where standard is greater than 1. Right now, run the application, then you will see more records in the collection, right? So you can see more records, right? So this is how you need to use toList. Apart from toList, you can use toDictionary, toArray, all these things, right? So if you know, there is something called a group by clause in SQL Server, right? So there is something called a group by clause in SQL Server. So can anybody tell me what is the use of a group by?
I mean, you can like group the filter data based on like particular columns. So for
Right.
example, marks or like a
Aggregated.
city.
Exactly. So basically based on a particular column, if you want to group the data, right? If your database containing three types of data, one is mobile, another is a laptop, another is a desktop, right? And if you want to group how many records are there belongs to mobile, how many records are there belongs to laptop, how many records are there belongs to desktop, right? Then in that case, based on that particular column, you need to group the data. The same thing is also going to be performed by this group by, right? So in this case, what it will do based on the standard ID column, right? It is going to group the student information, right? So students, right? It is going to be grouped by this, and here you can see student MS, right? So whatever data it is returning, I'm looping through, right? It is looping through each group, and from each group, right? I'm just going to fetch all the student information, right? Again, these things I'm going to discuss in detail, right? So, but I'm just showing you. So group by is going to be generated, right? Standard ID one. How many records are there in standard ID one? That information will be represented here. Standard ID two, standard ID three, standard ID four, like this, right? So, and this is the select statement it is going to generate, right? So this is group by functionality. Again, I'm going to discuss, right? So many ways. So this is the method syntax. There is also called a group syntax, right? What is this exactly doing? How you are, what is this key property? How you are accessing the data? Everything we are going to discuss in detail, right? So, but not now. Once we start discussing the link queue. Another option is there order by clause, right? Suppose in SQL Server, you might know something called order by, right? Order by column. You can specify one column, multiple column, right? One column in ascending order, another column is descending order. By default, it is ascending order, right? Those things are also available in SQL Server, right? That means if you want to implement such functionality, right, then you can also use the link queue order by method, right? And guys, whenever I'm saying the link queue, you can write the query in two different ways, right? You can write the query in two different ways by using the method syntax or by using the the query syntax, right? So in this case, it is going to order the data in ascending order, right? Order by, suppose you want to data in descending, you can use this order by descending method, right? And if you want to data in ascending order, then you can also simply you need to write this one order by, right? By default it is ascending, and if you want to data in descending order, you have to write order by descending, right? I will show you later, coming in our coming sessions, right? I will show you, in this case I'm applying only one column. If I want to apply multiple column, then by, right? Order by, descending, ascending, multiple options are there, what we are going to discuss, right? So in this case, it is going to sort the student data in ascending order based on the first name column, right? This is the method syntax. Here I'm using a method to specify the condition. And this is nothing but your query syntax, which is very much similar to your SQL query, right? So how, see this statement, how you are going to read. So now you have to read select star from, right? Select star from the students table, right? Select star. So S means it is nothing but you can consider star, right? Select star, not from all so from the students table, order by first name descending, and then just project the project the result set of this one, right? So this is what it is equivalent to this thing, right? Again, I'm not explaining these things in detail, right? I will explain this thing in detail. What is query syntax, what is method syntax, how you can write the query using query syntax, how you can write the query using method syntax, right? What is the best way to read this statement, right? What is the meaning of this from, as, and in, right? And what is the use of these things, right? So in this case, if you are having, right, if you are having a for each loop, right? So in that case, it is something similar to for each. Please select all the records and store inside this variable. Then order this data, right, in first name ascending, and then return the data which is stored inside this variable, right? So there are many different ways which you can read this statement. I will show you what are all those ways, right? So in this case, and this is your method syntax, right? So now run the application and you will see that first name data in ascending order, right? So you can see the first name Kel, Rohit, Smriti, and Virat. This the data is in ascending order, right? This is what you can say order by clause, right? So there is something called anonymous objects, right? Anonymous object means what? Now means suppose you do not want to fetch all the data. So in this case, if you are using S, right, and if we and by default all the student data is going to be written and it is going to be stored inside a variable of student, right? Now I don't want that, right? So I'm not going to, I'm not interested to fetch all the data from the student table. And I don't want that naming convention, right? What is provided by student. So I'm just going to create a different name, right? First name, right? I'm not interested with first name. I'm interested with F name. I'm interested with the L name, right? So I'm just going to give a different, I'm just going to project, right? It is something like first name as F name, right? It is like this. Last name you can consider as a L name, or if you don't consider directly, you can written like this. And in this case, you can see the column name is first F name, and here it is standard, right? So the same thing is there. So you want the first name column? Yes, I want the first name column value, but inside a different variable. I'm going with the last name as it is, right? And I want the standard ID column, right? So right? So in this case, I'm just using this one, and I am interested with the standard, right? Standard ID. So here, std dot standard ID, and I'm just going to add some value 100, right? So this is also possible now. Now in this case, so this select statement, right? It is going to return me F name, last name, standard ID. Is there any class which having these three properties? If available, then you can specify that class name here. If not available, don't specify anything. If you do not specify anything, then by default, it will consider this as an anonymous type. And here you can see the type is going to be anonymous. See, you can see it is saying anonymous type, right? So, and for example, you want a specific type, right? Let me create a class type here. Class some type, right? And in this class type, what I'm doing, I'm creating one variable called fname, and the type of this variable, it is going to be string, right? And here I'm creating another variable with the name last name, and here I'm creating a variable with the name integer name, or integer type, and the name is going to be standard ID, right? So this is what, right? Now instead of some type, I can also provide this one, right? So now what is this? Integer nullable, right? So here you need to mark this as nullable type, right? So here you can see now it is not going to show me the type as some, I mean that anonymous, right? Now it is showing me the type as some type, right? So let me first show the example without using this one, right? So what is the name? F name. What is the last name? And the standard ID column we are also fetching. Let me also put that in the output window, right? So here, right? So in this case, this is what, right? Now run the application. So this is nothing but your projection. You are projecting the output to in a different format, right? You can see here the output now. Instead of this, right, if you do not want to use that anonymous type, you can also create a type and you can specify that type here, right? And it is also going to work as expected. right? So this is nothing but your method syntax, right? And if you want to do the same thing using query syntax, then this is nothing but your query syntax, right? From std in context dot student, project all the student information into this variable, and then select the data, right? Or project the data from this variable to a different format, right? So this is the query syntax, and this is the method syntax, right?
So like we can do anything with any of the method, right? Or there is a like restriction in sense of like in some cases we cannot use like a query or like a method syntax. Is there a case?
Anything, right? Some restriction is there, but most of the 90% thing you can do using both query syntax and the method syntax, right? What you cannot do, that what we are going to discuss whenever we start when we are going to learn LeetCube, right? But
Okay,
most of the
okay.
time that query syntax and method syntax both are available, right? If you are very good at SQL, then you can go with this query syntax, and if you are not good at SQL, you can go with the method syntax, right? But behind the scene, whether you use query syntax or method syntax, performance is going to be same,
Okay, okay.
right?
Which one is like easy and like
Again,
concise
I'm
for?
saying that if you are good at SQL, you can go with query syntax. If you are not good at SQL, you can go with method syntax. Because this,
Okay,
right, in query, we are going to use some SQL type syntaxes, right? Not exactly the SQL, but sometimes from std in context dot select new, right? The select command, right? This from new, from in. So these are similar to your SQL server, right? So again, we'll discuss this thing in detail, right? So basically, if you are good at SQL, then you can go with the SQL query syntax, right? This query syntax. If you are not good, then you can go with method syntax, right? Now I will give you one example. You will understand this thing better, right? In this case, I'm going to perform a joining operation between the student and student address table, right? So what I'm going to do now, context dot student. So this is nothing but your outer data source, right? So if you are going to perform some kind of a joining operations, right, then you need two database table, right? So this is your first database table, and you are calling the join method, right? Join method. Inside this join method, you have to provide the second data source or second database table. So student is the first database table, student address is the second database table, right? Then if you know while you are working with join, right, then you need to provide some on condition, right? On condition, you have to provide which are the columns based on which you are going to perform the joining operation between these two tables. And that column information is nothing but your key selector here. And this is nothing but your inner key selector student. You can access this variable using any name. I'm accessing using student dot student ID, and you can access this outer key selector, right? Outer key selector means inner key selector, student ID, outer key. So this is outer, and this is inner key selector, right? Okay, so the outer is nothing but your student database. From the student database, I want the student ID column on the on condition with the student address table, student ID column, right? And once you have provided the two table and joining on condition, then you can access those two table data using the lambda expression, right? So you can see this is nothing but your student object, right, and student address. And what is this? This is the variable. Using this variable, you can access the student collection or student data source. Using this variable, you can access this student address data source, right? Now I'm projecting the data, right? Projecting the data into anonymous type. If you want, you can create a new type. You can specify the new type that should have these three columns, right? If this is not available, you can also create an anonymous type, right, without specifying any name. And here I'm providing the student name is going to be student first name plus student last name. Address line 1 is address line 1, address line 2 is address line 2. If you don't like this thing, you can also merge this or anything, you can any operation you can perform here, right? And then you can use a for each loop to display the student name, address line 1 and the address line 2. So this is nothing but your query syntax, so method syntax, right? Now, if you are very good at SQL Server joining all these things, right, then you can go with the query syntax, right? So from student in context dot student, this is your first data source. I'm joining this data source with the student address table in, right? This is your first data source you are accessing to this variable. Second data source you are accessing this variable. So you can say it is an alias of the student data source, and this is an alias of this student address data source. So what is alias? Suppose if in this case, if you come to here, right? So select star from student S. Here S is nothing but an alias of student, and student address. This SA is nothing but an alias of this one. And then I'm just writing S dot student ID and SA dot student ID. So the same thing is here. This student is nothing but an alias of this data source, and this is an alias of this data source, right? So, and then I'm using the on condition, right? So you can see here it is using the on condition. Then the alias of student data source dot the column name equals student data source dot the second column. So here you can see I'm using this equal or now operator. Here I'm using the equals method. The equal operator will not work here. You have to use the equals, right? Once you perform the joining operation, right, then you can see whatever column you want to fetch in the select clause, that you have to specify. You want to fetch all the column, few columns, some column of student database, some other column from student address database. So whatever column you want to fetch, that you have to provide in this section, right? And this is exactly same as this one. So now if you are very good at SQL Server, then you can go with this syntax. If you are not good at joining and SQL syntaxes, you can go with this method syntax, right? So now
Yes.
which now
Sorry.
yeah, you can ask me. Yeah.
Okay, so from line number 12 to 16, like you wrote a code, right? But I don't know like how it's working, because like based on like a SQL syntax, I can easily identify like you need to fetch the data from this table and joining on particular this table based on this condition. Like we find some keyword like from, join, on, but this syntax like 12 to 16 is really like it seems difficult.
Right. So this is the reason why I'm saying, if you do not have any experience on SQL, right? If you do not know what is join, how to perform join on databases, can you understand this syntax?
Uh, no, but I can understand because I know a little bit of SQL. So
Exactly. That is the reason why I'm saying, right? If you are good at SQL, then you can go with this query syntax. If you are not, if you, I see, I don't know what exactly the SQL Server database is, how to write, join, all these things. I don't. Then I can go with the join syntax, right? So in this join sentence means it's a method, right? If you go to the definition, then it is saying, so T outer, T inner, T key, T result, right? These are the things I need to provide. So this is nothing but your what parameter inner data source. This is what parameter the outer key selector. This is outer param. What is this parameter? The inner key selector parameter, right? Why this parameter? Because it wants to join these two tables. So if he wants to join two tables, then he should have some common column, and those common columns I need to provide here, right? But behind the scene, right? This join method, what exactly the SQL syntax is going to be generated, the same is going to be generated by this one, right? Let me show these things.
The order which you have followed, we have to follow the same, or we can go with a different order.
So different order means?
Inside the join method, you can see there is a inner data source, then we have a
See,
outer key selector, then we have a inner key selector.
see,
Can
the
we
thing, that is what I'm saying. Okay, let me first write this statement, then I will come to that part,
okay.
right? Right. So basically it is going to generate do a left join, right? Left join means what is the left, right? The key selector order, it doesn't matter, right? So in this case, this is your left table, this is your right table. In the joining condition, right? If you write like this, right? Or if you change the order, does it matter?
No.
Does it matter at all?
No.
No. What is important? The table name. Which one is the left table? Which one is the right table? That is important.
Right.
But that is also not important in the case of inner join. If you are performing some other kind of join, left join, out, right, then in that case it is matter. But in this case it is not matter.
Okay.
Right. So let me run this application. Right. So you can say it is selecting and it is performing a inner join. Right. This is the SQL statement, and the same SQL statement is also going to be generated by this query syntax. So what it means? It means whether you use the method syntax or you use the query syntax, right? Is that matter?
No.
If same query means the same thing is happening. So behind the scene, the thing is going to be same. Performance-wise, both are going to be same, right? So this is what you can see. In this case, you can see this thing, right? So if you are good at SQL Server, then you can see. So, but what I feel is better if you are going for complex queries, right? Complex queries means joining, grouping, multiple tables will come into the picture, right? Then it is always better to go with the query syntax, right? But if you are writing some simple queries, right? Only from the database table, you want to filter some data based on the where condition, go with the method syntax only, right? Right. So guys, and if you are having right, I know you are not understanding what I'm showing in this example or previous examples, but I'm not explaining these things right now. Why? Because we are going to cover this thing in detail, right? What I'm showing you now, using entity framework, what you can do, right? Whatever operation you can do using your SQL server, right? The same thing you can also do using your entity framework and the LibQ queries. Clear?
Yes.
Right. So in the next session, which is on Monday, we are going to discuss some interesting concept, right? Interesting concept called lazy loading, eager loading, and explicit loading, right? So because those lazy loading, eager loading, and explicit loading, right? Those are very useful and very important from the performance point of view, right? If you are developing an application, by taking performance into the considerations, right, then you have to understand those things very well, right? So while working with entity framework, you should know what is lazy loading, explicit loading, and what you can say eager loading, right? It's also possible that so you are making one query, right? You want some of the filter condition to be executed on the database, while some of the filter condition to be executed on your .NET part. This is also possible. Right? How this is possible? Those are we are going to discuss in our comment sessions, right? Any question from anyone from today's session?
No question from today's session, but I have seen one topic on the website which says is asynchronous programming with entity framework. Can you please tell me like what?
I'm going to cover that in detail. Why?
No. Because I joined this batch in the middle, so I do not have
Right,
idea about
right. So
asynchronous
asynchronous
programming.
programming using entity framework, I'm going to cover in this session. Right. In our coming session, I'm going to show you this thing.
No, that is okay, but like I want to know like what are the prerequisites for this topic. So
Okay,
because
prerequisites. So basically, if you see, we are having something called asynchronous programming. So just go
yes.
through this document.
Okay, got it.
Right, async what is task, right? Task of t value task, right? How to cancel a long running task, right? How to control the output of asynchronous programming, what is task based of asynchronous programming, how to cancel the execution of an asynchronous programming, right? Just go through this, and apart see, while you are learning asynchronous programming, don't learn from the beginning, right? So first you
Okay.
need to understand multi-threading, then asynchronous programming, then parallel programming, right?
Okay, got it.
Because those are interrelated with each other, right? If you do not know what is multi-threading, then it will be difficult for you to learn asynchronous programming. If you do not know asynchronous programming, that's fine. Parallel programming, you can easily learn. But some of the concept, right? How to cancel the execution of a parallel operation, right? So we are using something called task control source class, right? So how to use that class? That is what I'm explaining in this session, right? So, right. So you have to learn these things in a sequence, right? So just watch those videos and documentations. And if you still feel anything, any difficulty, then please let me,
Okay, got it. Thank
right?
you.
Because see, asynchronous programming is very important, right? If you are developing some, if you want to improve the performance, right, then it should be, you should know what is multi-threading, asynchronous, and parallel programming.
Yes.
Clear? Any question from anyone else? Okay. So next class is on Monday, right? We are going to take 2 days leave. And guys, whatever we have discussed so far, please do practices. Without practicing, you will not understand all the concept, right? Once you do practices, then you will understand the concept. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.